everyone, and welcome to the Culture Cast. I am Chris Stashew. We are kicking off Jess Byard June, and I am joined by one of the writers for DC Titans, one of my close friends. He's a good guy, Mr. Richard Hatem.
Hello, Chris!
So look, we're going to be kicking off Jess Byard June, like I mentioned, by talking about Ken Russell's The Devils. Jess could not be here for this podcast. Unfortunately, technical snafus, a little bit of timing issues. It happens sometimes. This is podcasting. This is not the end of the world. This is not life and death. However, that being said, I think we need to have a little quick discussion about what's going on in this country. This podcast is my platform. I could go to Facebook. I could go to Twitter, but I'm going to do it on this podcast. So if that's not something you have any interest listening to, go ahead and skip forward. And if you're a racist and you're the kind of person who doesn't agree with what people are doing right now and trying to better this country and push this country in a better direction, maybe just stop listening to my podcast altogether, because I don't need your listens. Look, realistically, what's going on in this country right now, Richard, you're a generation, 2 generations ahead of where I am. You've seen stuff like this before, maybe not to this magnitude, but this is years upon years upon years of this country's wounds that have been band-aided over, finally, seemingly, being opened fresh for the entire world to see. I mean, look, we've had riots in Ferguson, we've had riots all over the place due to the execution, the murder of African-American men, and African-Americans more substantially than just colored people in general, but obviously African-Americans, Black Lives Matter. That's the most important thing we take away from it, is that African-Americans are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement and punished by law enforcement and punished by our criminal justice system, which in and of itself is broken. But we're protesting all kinds of things right now, but police brutality is one of them. Racial inequality is another, obviously. Okay. I'm not trying to sit here and say I know more than anybody else, but what I do know is that if you're a racist, you're a piece of shit. I know that if you have hate in your heart towards someone else just because of the color of their skin, you should get fucked. Get fucked right now. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't tell someone to not be a racist, but you can sure make them look like an asshole for being one. And you can call them out for it. And if you hear people saying shit that's racist, you should take them to action for it, because you know what? It's hard to do the right thing. It's hard to call out your friends and family for being racist. It really is. It's not fun. It's not a good conversation to have, but it's a conversation worth having with people that you think in your life and have seen evidence of them being racist. It's important to call those people out. It's important to make sure that they're aware that racism is not something that is part of your life and needs to be part of your life and needs to be part of something that you participate in. And I don't know how you feel about this, Richard, but I feel like some of what's going on with the response in severity that we're seeing is exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I've got a lot of thoughts. I will say that, we're in this weird time where people hear what you're saying right now and they're like, well, I know I'm not a racist because I know that I'm not like, I'm not like a Ku Klux Klan person, and I don't hate people that are a different color than me.
Or a different creed or anything.
Or a different thing. But I don't see why they shouldn't be. And if they just, and that's where I think that's where many, many more people find themselves. And because the first reaction, of course, is a defensive thing. It's like, well, I'm not a bad person, but those people are not behaving the way I would, and they should they should be reacting in the way I would react. And I will say this, what I've learned very recently, and I'm 53, have always been, a member of a liberal Democrat family. But what I've learned is there's this other part of it. And the other part of it, if you don't mind my saying, is, you do a paranormal podcast.
Right.
I've written about the paranormal. I've studied the paranormal. So if we can use that as our metaphor for a second, when you're studying the paranormal, and when you're talking to people who have, lived in a haunted house, who have been had an abduction experience, for instance, you're listening to someone say, "This is my experience."
They're opening up.
And they're opening up. And again, personally, I have not found a lot of people lying and trying to say they've been abducted because they think it's going to make them popular. They're telling you their experience and you're listening to it. Guess what? I don't share that experience. I've never lived in a haunted house. I've never been abducted by aliens. But when I talk to those people, I am hearing them describe their experience. I've had women tell me that they have been sexually harassed in the workplace, that they have been treated in a way that I have never been treated. Well, okay, because something is not my experience does not mean that experience does not exist, whether it's a person who has been abducted by aliens, lived in a haunted house, been a woman in America, or been a person of color in America. These all are people who have had experiences that I have not had. And I can either go, well, I've never experienced that, so that's bullshit. Your UFO story is bullshit, and I'm sure you did something to lead that guy on, and I'm sure if you just behaved differently, you would not have been treated in the way that you think you got treated. You can live your life one of two ways. You can either understand that people have had fundamentally different life experiences from you and just accept it. And you don't have to get defensive. You don't have to worry that that makes you a bad person. Just listen. Shut your mouth, open your ears, listen, and at the end of it go, my God, I've never had that experience. You have. Thank you. Now I know something. There are people in this country right now who are doing that. And there's other people going, fuck those people. That makes me uncomfortable. I'm not bad. Dominate.
I've never thought about it in comparing it into something like that, but it makes perfect sense. And at the end of the day, like you said, I can sympathize, but I can't empathize because I'm not black and I haven't had a paranormal experience and I'm not Hispanic. I'm not a person of color. I'm not. And neither
you're not a woman.
Yeah, and I'm not a woman, or I'm not transgender. I'm not any of those things where people have had experiences drastically different from my own. And even people who are like me, cisgendered white men, have had experiences different from my own. Men have been raped. Men have been, men have been discriminated against. But that's not the point. It's never been the point. This is not about me and you. This is not about us. This is about the people who have been disenfranchised. This is about the people who have had things happen to them that many of us can't even comprehend. I have not ever been scared to leave my house. I mean, look, I won't lie to you. I, as a white man, still don't want to be pulled over by the cops because I don't trust the cops. No one in my family does. I was raised to not trust police. Is that an unfair statement to make? Maybe. Are there good cops out there? Of course there are. We're not talking about the good cops. Just like when people are talking about the protests and there being rioters, you can't lump all the protesters in with the rioters. You just can't. But yet people who complain about you saying, well, all cops are bad, they then go, well, all the protesters are rioters. They're literally don't understand that they're using their own argument that they hate against something else that's going on.
Well, people are always trying to let themselves off a largely imaginary hook. Well, I never owned any slaves, so why is anyone ever? But no one is saying that.
No, yeah, and it's not ever been about a personal attack. And if you make it personal, if you start attacking other people, then you deserve to be attacked personally, because if you're going to start throwing, sticks and stones at someone, you deserve to have it thrown right back at you, because that's the way it works.
And when you come at a situation like that from a place of defensiveness, and we are automatically at opposite ends of this, you get situations where the violence escalates.
Where cops are gassing innocent civilians.
Right.
Rubber bulleting innocent civilians. Mind you, innocent civilians who are put through academy to protect. Remind everyone that the cops are meant to protect the public, protect and serve. And how is protecting and serving gassing citizens and shooting them with rubber bullets who are sitting on their stoop of their house?
When the assumption is that any protest is in itself an act of insurrection and violence and must be met as such, yeah, guess what? You're going to have problems, as we have seen.
They're counter-protesters. That's the way I've been looking at this whole thing.
And in the cities all throughout America, many, many cities where the police have set down their guns and protested peacefully alongside the protesters, guess what? No violence.
Right. Taking knees, showing that they care. Because, again, they're human just like the rest of us. Sure, they've been given a position that we don't have, that some of us can't even begin to understand. I can't begin to understand what it's like to wake up every morning knowing that you could go to work and not come home. I don't understand what that's like. No one, unless you have worked a job like that, can understand that. And that's something that's something that a lot of people take for granted. Like I said, I'm no fan of the police, but one has to take solace in the fact that someone else chooses to do that job, not me. But at the end of the day, the silence from the law enforcement in this country is deafening. The silence is deafening from so many law enforcement officers and law enforcement officials. The silence regarding what's been going on in this country is deafening. And it's unfortunate, and it has to come to an end, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction. And don't forget, we're here because of a small amount of dominoes pushing into the larger one. It's just like the pandemic. One thing after another, and then we're here. Don't forget, there were people peacefully protesting, and there have been for years, decades even. And yet they were told that they were un-American for taking a knee during a football game. Un-American for taking a knee during a fucking football game. Get off of your fucking high horse and fuck yourself. It's about as peaceful as humanly possible.
Yeah, exactly. And no one quite seems to remember that.
No. Well, they do now that it's being shown to them as you could have cared then, and people could have cared then, and people could have listened then, but instead everyone was told they're a bunch of thugs and, they're taking a knee and they're disrespecting the veterans in the country. No, they're taking a stand for what they believe in.
Because it's uncomfortable. Because it feels, as peaceful as it is, it feels like an accusation.
Sure.
And then people, their hackles get up, and I never did. I've never done it. And it's like, guys, no, you don't need to respond to this. You don't need to use this as an opportunity to get angry at the fact that someone had a different experience than you.
And you don't need to use it as an opportunity to stroke your own ego.
Yeah. We're all living in a country where a lot of shit's going down, and it's not our fault, and we're not the ones saying it.
Well, I mean, we're not going out into the street and shooting African Americans or anyone. We're not doing any of that. Yeah. But we're part of this country, like everyone else is.
Yeah. When I go to work in Canada, and people go, "What the fuck is going on in America?" I don't immediately go, "Why are you attacking me?" I'm like, "Yes, I know what you're referring to. Yes, I get it.
We get it. We understand."
Yeah.
No, it's unfortunate, and what's going on now is not unfortunate. What's going on now is hopefully a step in the right direction. Hopefully a dialogue is opened with the people that the dialogue needs to be opened with. Lawmakers and others start taking actions to curb police violence, and the police themselves start doing more checks and balances on their own officers. Because the thing about what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, 3 police officers stood by and watched it happen and didn't say a word. They stood there as a man was on the ground begging to breathe, and they let it happen. And tell me how that's okay.
Yeah.
It's awful. It's awful. It is one of the worst things I have ever seen in my entire life. And I think everyone should go and watch it, because if you can sit back and tell me that people don't have a right to be as angry as they are, which they should, myself included, then you go fuck yourself. If you don't think people have a right to be as angry as we are right now about what happened, then you can go fuck yourself. That's just the truth.
Oh, which brings us to the devils.
Which brings us to something that actually holds a lot of significance with what we were just talking about, because there's a lot of really topical issues with the devils. So let's talk about it.
Do you remember the first time your thoughts were turned to evil things?
He plies me with caresses, lustful, obscene. He enters my bed at night and takes from me that which is consecrated to my divine bridegroom, Jesus Christ.
And what form does this incubus take?
Who is responsible for this evil possession?
But of course I can prove nothing. This Mother Superior may be little more than a hysterical nun.
But if it is a genuine case of possession by devils, and if Grandier himself was proved to be involved, then yes, I think it bears investigation, gentlemen.
You've been a magician.
I'd commerce with devils.
You face eternal damnation.
Conjecture is useless. We need a professional witch hunter. We must send for Father Barre. No surprises for you.
I will start by saying I've never seen this movie.
I hadn't either.
I think that Altered States might be the only Ken Russell movie I've seen, unless I'm forgetting some other somewhat mainstream movie which I would have had the opportunity to see. But this movie I would happily watch again. I watched it last night. I'd happily watch it again tonight. I thought this was a fantastic movie. Thoroughly entertaining. Weird as shit, but I loved it.
In Jess Byard June, I give Jess the ability to program the entire month. So she programmed the entire month films that she wanted, and she decided to pick Ken Russell and Ken Russell films, and I have seen no Ken Russell films up until this one. This is the first Ken Russell film that I've seen. I haven't even seen Altered.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this is me coming at this film from a completely novice angle. And you know what? I'm right there with you. I mean, it is a hard film to watch. There are a lot of themes and topics in this film that are covered that are really, really, really rough and not not pleasant to think about or talk about, especially right. Sexual repression, the abuse of power. But it's a rough movie. It's a rough watch. It's a film that it's going to stay with you after you're done watching it. It really is. And then you realize that this is based off of a real person. This is based on real events that happened. I mean, obviously they're dramatized because, it wouldn't be nearly as exciting. But, Urbain Grandier, he was a real person. Jean de Agnes, that was a real person as well. Cardinal Richelieu, for the fact that obviously everybody knows him from The Three Musketeers. He was a real person. So, right. There's a lot going on in this movie because it's based off of real events on top of everything else. But my God, this is a movie. Like, this is a movie is as much as movies are ever a movie. This is a movie 100%. Yeah. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I hadn't seen it sooner. But it's one of those things where, like, I think I approach every movie like this. Like, literally, and I'm 53. I work in the entertainment business, and every time I sit down to watch a movie, I'm like, oh God, I really don't want to watch this. I'm really afraid I'm going to be bored. Unless it's like a James Bond movie, I'm like, is this going to be boring? Am I not going to get it? And when it's a period piece, I'm like, oh boy, I'm not going to understand a fucking word of this. But this thing comes at you, and it's so loud and unsubtle. And you get every minute. You understand, oh, okay, he's in charge of the city. I get it. I get what the women in the convent are all about. I get what they're into. I get what the cardinal's into. I get what the king is into. I totally get it. No one is trying to be pretentious or subtle or we're not. It's like, no, we are going to. It's like a Kubrick film in a way where it's just visually arresting. There's humor in the darkest situations, a lot of humor. I would almost call this a comedy in a way, a black comedy. It's like you've said so far. I mean, this is a film that, man, it lays itself bare very quickly and early on. It really lays itself bare. So the film is directed by and produced by and written by Ken Russell. It is based on two pieces of fiction, The Devils of Loudun and The Devils. One of those is by Aldous Huxley, who many Americans should know if they've read any sort of fiction in high school. But it also stars Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave, a bunch of other people. We're going to talk about them, but Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave are the two main players in the film. And it follows Oliver Reed as Urbain Grandier, a priest of the faith who finds himself on the receiving end of some very trumped up charges regarding him being a witch, I guess? Possessing women, driving them into the arms of the devil, I guess, is probably the most bombastic way of saying it.
Yeah, it's sort of using or like somehow using his position in the church to take sexual advantage of the nuns in this convent. The convent, so the convent is led, the Mother Superior is Vanessa Redgrave, whose head is constantly tilted to the left.
Because she's handicapped. She's handicapped. She has a hump on her back, yeah. Well,
like, you don't know that at first, but then in one of her first fantasy sequences, because she early on you realize that, and it's Oliver Reed, and he's, attractive and a very magnetic personality. And you understand that a lot of these nuns have a big crush on this priest. And you're kind of like, on the one hand, that's really scandalous. And on the other hand, it makes total sense. You're like, that this probably happens all the time because these are human beings. Well, Vanessa Redgrave, of course, has this physical deformity, like a humpback. And she has not ever felt beautiful or felt valued for her physicality. And so her obsession with Oliver Reed, which we see in these just Baroque fantasy sequences where he literally climbs down off the cross in a loincloth and they engage in sexual congress while she sort of has a masturbatory fantasy in the middle of this convent. And you're like, okay, we got it. Again, not a subtle film at all. Wow, this is a pretty explicit film. Like, this would be rated X. Like, I don't know how.
It was rated X.
Yeah.
It was rated X. It was 100% rated X.
Well, I mean, I was joking last night that I've never seen a movie with more unarousing nudity. There's like tons of nudity, but the context within which it is presented is so disturbing that
what about House on Bear Mountain? That come on, Richard.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that was pretty unarousing too. But this is like really, it's like like part of you is like, oh, like maybe if I was 14, I'd be excited because I'm seeing nude flesh, but it's just so upsetting, and the music and the context of how it is being presented, that where people are gripped in this sexual mania and this religious mania and those two Venn diagrams are almost totally overlaid. It's not, you're not running to the bathroom to relieve yourself. Let me put it that way.
No, you're not. And on top of everything else, one of the main kind of things that the film tackles is sexual repression, because these nuns obviously are completely sexually repressed.
Right.
That's the point of being a nun, at least in the Catholic faith, is that you're taking a vow of celibacy. I mean, the priests take a vow of celibacy too. When we talk a little bit more about Oliver Reed's character, obviously his character doesn't play by those rules, but he understands that, and he has kind of made amends for the fact that that's who he is. But yeah, you have this idea of sexual repression taking place in this film, and you have all of these characters who are driven, like you said, to sexual mania because that's what they're told to do, to kind of show that this one character, Grandier, is kind of possessing them and making them do things that nuns should never do, like walking around and licking people's faces and walking around bare breasts and bush exposed. It's completely over the top, but at the same time, like you said, it's the imagery that Russell evokes is just so magnificent. And David Watkins' cinematography is, it's amazing. I mean, this film is just, like you said, this film, if I didn't know any better, it really does feel Kubrick-esque, which, if you're a filmmaker, I don't know any higher praise one would get other than this film is Kubrick-esque.
The production design is off the charts. Like scene after scene after scene, you're like, what is this environment? And I, obviously credit goes to director and cinematographer and production designer working as a creative team, but no attempt at like naturalism. No attempt at, well, okay, it's a convent. That's a building. It's like every location is production design to the nth degree. I'm thinking of that large white, I guess it's a library where the books, Cardinal Richelieu's library or something, these books are being kept behind these like gates in this all white room, and all those priests are going back and forth with dollies, putting these books on these shelves and locking these sort of metal fences, and Richelieu's being pushed along on some weird trolley, and it's this giant, like, it's got to be 4 stories tall, this set. For this scene that could have been accomplished in a 2 guys and a table. And it's like, no, we are going to town on this. And that's one scene out of what feels like 200 scenes that are rendered so beautifully. It is a visual feast, even when sometimes what you're seeing is truly frightening and repellent.
Yeah, I mean, you have scenes in this film of rooms that I would rather die than be in. Namely, the room where this kind of the sexual mania is really on display about halfway through the film, and Grandier comes back and he sees that, I'm in deep shit because I'm about to get blamed for every single thing known to man by one person. I mean, look, there's a lot of parallels that need to be drawn between this and the Salem witch trial, the Red Scare of the mid 20th century. There's a lot of this going on in this film, and it's, again, you're drawing these parallels to things that, are going on right now in this country with the abuses of power. I mean, you have characters in this film who are suppressing and oppressing others because that's what they want to do. They literally don't care about anything else other than the fact that they like oppressing and repressing others for their own sick, sadistic gains. To the point where you have the character of Louis XIII shooting Protestants dressed up like birds just because he can, because he hates Protestants, because he's been told to hate Protestants by Cardinal Richelieu. Right.
And it's funny, the meta concern that this drama plays out against is really just the consolidation of power in France at the very top, and the desire to rid these small principalities of any level of independence that they have. And the city of Loudon, where what's his name again? Grandier. Yeah, the Oliver Reed character. He's sort of the top priest, but also in a weird way, kind of like the top politician. And he's arguing for maintaining these walls that have been built around the city that serve to protect the city. And he's like, look, we are in France and we are French, but we are also Loudon, and that is our township. And these walls are what we have to protect us from this total control by the state, I guess. And that is the reason for everything that Richelieu and then eventually the king decide, no, we need to take control. We need to go and dominate every single last town so that no one can there will be no hotbeds of insurrection. And then they can't figure out how to do it. And then they figure out how to do it. They're like, we got it. We know how to take this guy down. And we can do it under the cover of religious purity.
Well, and it almost falls into their laps because the character of Jeanne d'Agnes, she is like we've mentioned already, she's a sex-starved nun who is absolutely obsessed with Grandier. And when she finds out that Grandier has married a character played by Gemma Jones, her character is named Madeline, when she finds out that he has married her, that is what sets the entire downfall of his character in motion, because she wants him for herself, even though he doesn't even know who she is. He has never met her. He's never even been in the same room as her. And yet she is obsessed with him. She imagines essentially filleting him as Christ, and that's her obsession, and her obsession with him leads to the downfall of Loudun and his downfall. And I mean, obviously, look, if you know nothing about French history, I mean, I can't blame you because this country has a problem with teaching history of other countries, but, it would effectively also set into motion the downfall of the French ruling class as well. I mean, they didn't survive. They didn't survive into the 21st century. I can't imagine why.
All of those great grinding gears of history being reduced down to these emotions that literally anyone who has been through high school can totally understand. It's like that person that I am obsessed with, whether it's a sexual obsession or a crush, at school or in the workplace, or if you're obsessed with a star or a celebrity. If you feel that you suddenly have some sort of power in that relationship to actually affect the life of that person, that elevates you to such a degree that there's no telling what you'll do. I mean, you could almost watch a double feature of this and Misery and go, oh yeah, these are both about very disempowered people who are obsessed with celebrities and suddenly have power over the object of their obsession and what becomes of those people.
I couldn't really figure out, and I think it's more or less left up to the audience interpretation. Maybe not, maybe it is rather clear, but Vanessa Redgrave's character doesn't intend to get Grandier killed by the state. I don't think that's her intention. She essentially is coerced, again, going back to things that we can understand in the 21st century, she's coerced into making these trumped up claims against him. I mean, she's anally raped by these fathers. She's not tortured, but more or less tortured into admitting all of these trumped up claims against Grandier. That he's,
right.
He's in her room at night, and he brings the devils in with him, and it's like, Jesus H. Christ. Like,
well, it starts.
It's so relevant and brutal at the same time.
It starts with her saying something. And then fairly quickly she backpedals, but by then it's too late because people have realized, oh, she's a powerful bit of leverage. And so you're possessed. And now we're going to give you an exorcism. And by the way, this is before The Exorcist. And this is a big movie that was about exorcism. And I believe me, everyone involved, William Friedkin and everybody else, saw this movie before they did The Exorcist, because there's some stuff from this movie that ends up in The Exorcist.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, look, this is a film not for the weak of heart. I'm dead serious when I say this. There is a reason that this film is as controversial and, oh, by the way, as hard to find as it is in the United States. It's still almost impossible to find this film in the United States. I don't think it's ever actually had a proper release by Warner Brothers in the United States. I know Guillermo del Toro was one of this film's kind of big champions. In 2014, he went on record saying that it's it's inappropriate and it's frankly kind of ridiculous that they've censored the devils and they've essentially put it in this spot where no one can enjoy it. I mean, look, this film is offensive, but at the end of the day, that's okay. A film can offend you.
Yeah, and it was made 50 years ago. Think about that. This was not something, oh my gosh, it's super. 50 years ago, 1971, it was made, and people read the script and saw the rehearsals and the dailies and said, yeah. Now, I'm curious as to, now I want to find out about the whole history of this film. But yeah, listen, I mean, Ken Russell went to town. I mean, there were all gas, no brakes. And he was like, I am going to tell this story about hypocrisy and about, religious hypocrisy and just no holds barred. And the imagery is horrifying. The music's horrifying. I mean, it's just, and at the same time, relentlessly entertaining. Like there was a point toward the end because this is one of those movies where it's like, confess to this hideous crime and we won't torture you to death. So admit that you're a monster and we'll let you live, probably. I mean, you'll be imprisoned and the rest of your days will be horrible. Or you can insist that you're an innocent, good person and we'll torture you to death until you die. It's one of those.
Burn you alive.
And then, well, yeah. So, and then burn you alive. And so those scenes are very, very difficult to watch. And frankly, they don't really show you a lot of blood and a lot of stuff. It's just the performances are so excruciating that he does not pull any punches, Ken Russell.
No, he does not. And a lot of those torture scenes were also cut down, obviously. Again, there's a lot of censorship that went into this film. I mean, this film, like I said, still has never been given a proper North American release. The British Film Institute is the only release that the film has ever gotten in the original X-rated cut of the film. And that was, I mean, again, you can go and buy it, but good luck. I mean, you won't be able to watch it on a DVD player in the States because I believe it's probably PAL formatted as opposed to NTSC. But the issue with this film, like you've mentioned, is there's so much about this film that the story of the film is as interesting as the film itself. This film got no play. It still doesn't even get play in England, where the people who made the goddamn film came from. It can only be shown in England as an entertainment, or as an educational piece, which in and of itself would love to see what college course that is.
I was going to say, does that only like film school?
It must be, or like a religious studies class or a history class. But my point is, like, there's so much to what this film means to the film community that we could have spent all of our time talking about that and never mentioned anything that happened in the film.
It would be very easy to kind of go the other way on this film and go, well, this is at a certain point it becomes absurd and it's too much. And it's like, we get it, Ken Russell. And I feel that way about a lot of filmmakers. Like, I'm not an Oliver Stone fan necessarily. I tend to feel he's force feeding everything to me, and his excesses I don't appreciate for some reason. But these images and they're so lurid and again delivered with this demonic sense of humor. In the darkest moments, I do detect a sense of humor, as I do in Kubrick films.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
It lets it off the hook for me. I'm like, okay, well, you're being absurd. Whereas with Oliver Stone, sometimes I'm like, you just think you're being profound. And then that puts me off. But it's like, okay, you get it. You're doing this on fucking purpose, and you're almost in a way winking at me and going, oh, you think that was a lot? Stick around. We got 20 more minutes. And I'm like, all right. So I don't know what it is, but for me, that's okay. I can accept. Plus the fact that the performance is amazing and the look of the movie is just gorgeous. I loved it.
Well, no, I mean, the set design and everything, like, that for me is really the thing that's going to stick in my mind, other than the message of the film. But right. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I think everything is going to stick in my mind about this film. I've never seen Oliver Reed in anything except for when I watched Gladiator, probably when I was 15. I have no love for that movie, and I have zero interest in revisiting it because I have never seen Oliver Reed in anything else.
I think I'm the same. I think I haven't really seen him.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in anything, and to me, this performance is... Look, I mean, I get that this is a controversial film, but holy shit, more people need to see this film.
Oh, yeah.
More people need to understand films like this and what makes this film important, and why this film is important to film history, and why this film is important to Western society.
And not only that, but it's like I thought about my kids. When I say my kids, I mean my kids who are in their 20s. I'm like, I want to show them this because I want to show them a movie made 50 years ago that can affect you so viscerally because there's not a single special effects shot. And yet what takes place in this movie is visually, you can't even believe what you're seeing. The level of artistry and the level of movies of that era to be able to affect you deep down in the guts. And no one was like, we'll do it in post. We'll make that fire look really cool. This is so physical and so immediate. And I know I sound like an old guy when I say that. Oh, these old movies, they really knew it. But you know what? My kids have seen some old movies, and you know what they react to the most are the stunts. They're like, "Ooh, Jesus! Like that guy got killed." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I forget that they're used to, the bullshit stunts of Fast and the Furious. They're not used to a guy falling out a window 40 feet and hitting the ground. And what it really looks like when all they're hitting is like a dust-covered pad, that looks brutal. And that's what movies used to be. They used to be super visceral.
Well, and there's I'm not a huge fan of the series, but Shudder did a series, and I don't know if they're bringing it back for another season, but they were talking about in the final episode of the series, Cursed Films, they were talking about something that we all know about if you know anything about film or even a brief knowledge of filmmaking in the 80s. They have an entire episode devoted to the Twilight Zone movie and the accident that happened on that set, and take your stance on how or who's to blame, what you will. That's not what we're here to talk about. But at the beginning of that episode, they talk about exactly what you're talking about, which is the 70s were the time and era of real filmmaking, like William Friedkin shooting a gun to get a reaction from people on set, like things that would not fly in 2020, things that probably wouldn't have flown in the 90s, let alone now. And you feel that visceral gut punch of a film when you talk about and watch something like this film, because this film should be mentioned in every conversation about the visceral feeling of watching a film that feels somewhat dangerous. I understand why this film's controversial. This film feels dangerous. It really does, in a way, but not like in a way that like pushes people away from.
Well, I've been on TV production sets. I've been on movie sets, and I'm looking at this movie going, how did they fucking do this? Like, they got 500 people, every last one of them costumed to the hilt, in a crowd shot that must have taken – it would take days now. I'm like, how were they feeding these people? How did, like, just on a production level, what if it rained? Like, how did they get the sky to look that way? I mean, seriously, questions that I would never ask now, because, like, well, it doesn't matter, because you would just make the sky blue, or you just fake the snow, or, it's fucking Game of Thrones, and who cares? But I'm like, I literally don't know. Did it take them 3 years to make this movie? How do you fucking make this movie? And it looks like it cost $1 billion it really does, equivalent fund. It really does. It's like, really, because they built sets that look like this thing is 75 feet tall, and people are coming up and down stairs, and I could not be more blown away.
Yeah, no, it's one of these things where when we talk about the filmmaking that's kind of lost, this kind of bombastic, visceral, real feeling of filmmaking, it is lost. I mean, there are still films that come out that try to kind of ape it and do it in a way that we can, as 21st century film watchers, really get behind. But there's something to be said for, and I'm a huge champion of practical effects, like clearly you are, there is something to be said for doing something real in a real set where you can see and touch and feel, and you know that the characters and the actors who are portraying these characters are existing within an actual tangible space. Yep. Whether or not it's a set or it's a building that they're on location, there's something about a physical set that can never be replicated, no matter how hard the best people at Weta Workshops or Industrial Light and Magic try to replicate it. There is nothing that they can do to replicate something like this film, or Easy Rider, or 2001: A Space Odyssey, or A Clockwork Orange. You just can't do it because there's no way to capture that realism and visceral feeling. You can't capture that with digital effects. It's just impossible, no matter how hard you try.
And these movies, you mentioned Clockwork Orange. They were trying to do a particular thing that I don't believe movies try to do anymore, and certainly not in that way where, it's like I want this to be deeply unsettling. and yet at the same time, not unsettling because it's, a Saw movie, which can be very visceral, but it's I don't want to say it's shooting lower, but it's sort of, its target is very narrow and it hits it. This obviously was a little bit broader, hitting more topics and yet employed many of the same tactics. I will say that people used to go to the movies seeking that out, and I don't think they do anymore, and that's fine. People get what they need from art eventually. But it was thrilling to see a movie that was made in that style and for those reasons and was relentlessly entertaining. And again, funny and fascinating and totally gripping. And, I really came away from it feeling like this might be the best movie I've seen, in a handful of years.
I'm right there with you. I'm glad you said it, because I didn't want to feel like the only one who felt that way. But I feel the exact same way. Like when my initial reaction watching this film, watching that final shot of Gemma Jones's character walking out of Loudun, the wreckage of Loudun, and you see these wheels in the air that are suspended on these pikes with these bodies turning on them. That shot is haunting and breathtaking and impressive all at the same time.
Right, and the sky is white, and the bricks are white, and the road is white, and literally I sat there through the credits watching that shot, because it's one of those shots where it's just like, walk down that road for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll send a car to pick you up, and that'll be the end of our film. But it was like, what if the sky wasn't white that day? What if it was not overcast? What if it was a blue sky day? There is no way, it just happened. They happened to get it on that day, and it was perfect. And I stand in awe of that sort of filmmaking, because you can't. There's no second chance. There's no fixing it in post. So yeah, it sounds like we are in violent agreement.
Oh yeah, and the other scene that really stood out to me, and I don't know where you come down on this, but we're talking about this visceral feeling that this film gives you. At the end of the film, Grandier is being executed. He's being burned at the stake, which is horrifying. One of the worst ways to die, period.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's cruel and it's grim and it's just ruthless, and it's a merciless way to put someone's life out of existence. I mean, it's really awful. And you have this scene where the Baron of La Bourdermont he knows that he's going to be destroying the city, and he knows that what happens after Grandier dies is he can take control of the city and destroy the city, which is what Cardinal Richelieu wanted. And you have the scene where the city, he gives the motion, and the city starts exploding. And this is a real shot with real people next to explosions. Things being thrown into the air. And I've watched that scene several times now. And all I could think to myself after watching this thing about this cursed film series where they're talking about people being close to explosions and, the safety that goes into making sure these things work, all I could think was, holy shit, that looked unsafe. But by God, it looked so real. It looked so real. So real.
Yeah, I would give it anything. I wish there was a book written about every last thing they did to make this movie.
There is. There's multiple books and documentaries.
I'm in.
But, I think ultimately, though, I'm curious where you come down on this, because this is something that we've kind of approached several times in the past, but we've kind of stayed away from these quote-unquote controversial films. Do you think that this film has a seat at the table for being classified as a controversial film? And where would you put it kind of on the list of things that you've seen that are quote-unquote controversial? Because we all have our own kind of headcanon of what is and isn't controversial.
Well, I mean, I would say the answer to the question is yes. Just in terms of people who watch movies and have seen movies, I would say that this is sort of in the same area as Clockwork Orange, where you're seeing a lot of inhumane, man's inhumanity to man, and yet tone-wise, it's very close in that there is this weird, dark sense of humor and an acknowledgement of, we know what we're doing. We know this is over the top. but we're doing it for a reason. And so I would put it there, and yeah, of course it's controversial. It's not one of those movies that is like, oh, well, this used to be considered controversial, and now you don't even know why. It's like, no. You see this movie, you're getting poked in the eyeballs, for sure.
It's very similar, like you said, it's very similar to some other controversial films, Clockwork Orange. It reminds me a lot of The Last Temptation of Christ, the way that it kind of handles the religious nature of the film, and it has something to say about religion and how religion is co-opted by people in power to do things that it should not be used for.
Well, I will agree with that, and I will also say that it's also a very interesting meditation on the structure of religion and what it is meant to do. In other words, over the centuries, religions have been, they've sort of been honed to a very fine point. And the stories and the buildings within which those stories are told and the music and the imagery are all there to evoke certain feelings. And it is so potent that it can easily go one step or 20 steps too far. There were characters in this movie, I think the exorcist in the movie is one of them, who I don't think they were being cynical or hypocritical or two-faced. That guy believed what the fuck he was doing. And you almost look at him as it's like, this is what religion is asking you to do. Ultimately, at the very end, if you take it very literally, this is what it is asking you to do. And it's horrifying.
Yeah, and the character of Pierre Barret, played by Michael Gothard, is just the biggest bastard in cinema history. He has to be up there with some of the biggest cinematic bastards of all time.
Yeah.
You have a character played by Murray Melvin, Jean Mignon. His character kind of gets some sort of redemption at the end where they're like, well, we jailed him because he went crazy because he realized that, what was happening was not right. But,
that guy, the skinny guy with the haircut.
Yeah, with the haircut. If you watch the film, which you should, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But Michael Gothard's turn as Pierre Barret is just, for as good as Oliver Reed is in this film.
Oh yeah,
Michael Gothard takes him to the edge with his acting as well. They are the two tenets of this film.
Oh yeah,
Oliver Reed and Michael Gothard.
And you love that guy, and he's horrible, and you love him.
Yeah, because his performance is as mesmerizing as Oliver Reed's performance.
Yeah.
You can't look away every time he's on scene. The costume that he's in, it's like a heavy metal priest in a way. Like you can see his like bare arms underneath his costume. This, like you've said before, this film takes a decision on the direction and the cinematic direction and the art direction and just runs with it, and it doesn't stop. It goes all the way, 100%.
Yep.
The use of black and white in the film is amazing. I mean, the colors alone, we could be talking about the colors and the use of color in this film as a complete conversation on its own, but it is just one of these films where, again, back to where we were talking about before, this is a film that it's important in 2020. More people should see it. Less people should be giving a shit about censoring it and banning it and making it hard to find, because it's a film that's important. And I think that it's a film that more people should see. And is it going to be a rough watch for some people? Of course. Does it feature rape and sodomy and executions and torture? Yeah, it has all of those things. But you know what it doesn't do? It doesn't have those things in the film for its own jollies. It uses them for a purpose and a point, and that, in my mind, what makes it, yes, controversial, but it's controversial for a reason. It exists to be its controversialness. It's not controversial just because it can be. It's controversial because it has something to say, and it's using this haunting, horrifying imagery to really nail the point home about what this film is talking about and how this film approaches religion. And look, I get it. I understand why people who are religious don't want anything to do with this movie, and the church and others and polite, quote-unquote, polite society want nothing to do with this movie. But it's a goddamn shame that they don't, because they're missing out on a film that really is something – it's something very special, and it's something very important that I think a lot of people if they watched it, would have a better understanding and a better appreciation of how cinema can really function as art, and art with a purpose that can maybe change things.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Richard, what would you give the film out of 5?
6.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I give it a 5. There's no question. I mean, this is I don't want to go out on a limb here too far, but this is one of the greatest films I've ever seen.
I would agree, and now you've really got to come up with something good for me to watch next.
The bar has been set so high now that nothing that we watch from here on out will ever live up to this film. I mean, look, I think I'm going to watch this. I'm going to have to rewatch this film again. I'm going to watch this film probably again in the next 24, 48 hours. And it'll be a film that really sticks with me. And I'm glad that we watched it. It's unfortunate that Jess couldn't join us, because I would love to hear a female perspective on this film.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously, our perspective on this film is a little it's a little one-sided. But, it's an interesting film, and it's a film that I really liked. And I'm really excited to introduce it to people that I know who would appreciate a film like this. So,
well, Professor, I await your next assignment.
Professor Stashy. Well, let's talk about what the next episode of the Culture Cast. So on the next episode of the Culture Cast, we are going to be watching another Ken Russell film for Jess Byard June. We're going to be watching Listomania. It is a film about Franz Liszt, the composer, the Hungarian composer. And oh, by the way, Richard, I did realize something. I bet you have seen another Ken Russell film.
Oh, which one?
Tommy, the Who movie.
Nope, never seen it.
Really? Me either.
I'm not a Who
but
fan.
I know it exists.
I know it exists, and if there was one I would likely have seen, it would probably be that one. I'm not a big Who fan. That was a big one when I was in high school. There were a lot of my friends were just like, oh my God, the Who, Quadrophenia. And I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I like the Who. Roger Daltrey. He's in the film that we're talking about in the next episode. I've never seen the Who's film Tommy. That's a Ken Russell film. We're not talking about it this month. Again, I kind of gave Jess carte blanche in what she wanted to talk about. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about Altered States. We're talking about some different Ken Russell films, some lesser-known Ken Russell films. Obviously, this film is one of the ones that he's known for, as much as they tried to censor and kind of push it away and push it down. So, but I will be joined by Jess next week, so I'm very much looking forward to it. Until then, until the next time you're on this Culture Cast, until the next time you're on the Culture Cast, Richard, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, real simple, my full name, Richard Hatem, at Richard Hatem.
And if you have any problems with DC Titans, he's the one you yell at.
Oof.
Yell at Richard. I'm just kidding. Don't yell at Richard. Richard's a nice guy. Why would you yell at him?
Yelling at me presumes I have some sort of control over the end product. But hey, you know what? If you want to yell, I will listen to your experience.
You know what it means if they yelled? It also means that they watched it. So,
Engagement.
Joke's on them. Oh, man. As for myself, you can follow me on Twitter at casualty_. Chris, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at CultureCast. CultureCast.com, Patreon.com/CultureCast is where we are on Patreon if you want to kick a couple dollars our way. Give us a good review on iTunes and Google Play. We're also on Spotify. Anywhere that you think you can find a podcast, we are there. So make sure to check us out there. We've been doing this I say we as if there's been anyone else other than me pretty much. I have been doing this podcast now for 6 years almost. It'll be 6 years in October. Yes, I have had multiple co-hosts, but I am still here. I am still fighting the good fight, talking about movies, joined by cool folks like Richard. So CultureCast.com is where you can find more episodes of this show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.